Exciting. Different Friday afternoon experience, I believe, for all of you. I don't actually know because I haven't been coming to these because Joey does an awesome job with all of that. But this one's slightly different, and the reason why we're doing a series of workshop opportunities across the next 4 semesters is because recently Vanderbilt launched an ABA-only track for returning special education teachers who wanted to get a BCBA edition. And in conjunction with that came some grant money. And the way that OSEP is thinking these days is that no single professional has what it takes to serve the complexity of needs of most children with disabilities. And so they are actively incentivizing interdisciplinary collaboration. And so the spirit of this grant is interdisciplinary collaboration, and the flavor of this grant is to kind of make BCBAs generally, which all of you are going to be, aware of some issues that are not directly trained in our verified course sequence. And so if I were to explain it in a slightly different way, I would say that we get a lot of training in learning mechanisms, operant learning mechanisms. We learn a lot about ways to get other people to do what we want them to do. And often, and any technology is neutral. It can be used for good or for bad. Often we use that in the service of teaching children to be more adaptive in life and succeed. Every once in a while, there are misapplications of behavior analysis. And, actually, Pablo Juarez, who I think you all heard speak maybe 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, something like that, has been a major catalyst for getting us all to think differently about the way that we practice here at Vanderbilt. And so some terms that have started to pop up that we're trying to attend to as faculty, Dr. Lloyd and Dr. Ledford, Dr. Barton, who's not here, also co-authored this grant. Terms that are starting to show up are things like trauma-informed care. And we feel a professional obligation to be competent in that and to understand what trauma-informed care is. So now we're kind of between a rock and a hard place because we understand instruction very, very well, and we don't understand trauma very, very well. And so we are kind of at the limits of our expertise. And so, do I have a...
There's a clicker, too.
Oh, great, okay. So, we've put together a 4-part series in professional development that we think will get us just a little bit closer to being able to provide trauma-informed behavior analysis than what was previously possible. And so we've asked a bunch of partners with a ton of expertise that we don't have to kind of show us our blind spots. And so across the next few semesters, starting now, we're doing mental health and wraparound services. These are 2 concepts mental health you already have. We're gonna learn about adverse childhood experiences and wraparound services for mental health professionals over the next 3 Fridays. And then in the summertime, we're gonna have Dr. Chauvin teach us about tiered systems of support, both in the domains of academics and behavior. And then in the fall, we're gonna ask Metro's specialist in embedding trauma-informed care into tiered systems of support. So hopefully you can see how this builds on each other. And then there's gonna be a limited opportunity for some subset of you who expressed interest to get some training in online course design, because we think teachers of the future probably need to know how to use digital platforms. And if there's ever another pandemic, we don't want you guys to feel as hopeless as maybe some of the teachers who got blindsided by the first pandemic. And so that is going to be, I think Vaba's figuring out how to offer scholarships through that. It's not for everybody, so we're not making everyone do it. But there's some subset of you who have to, and then the rest of you can if you want to. And so I'm trying to talk fast because I don't want to take any more time than I already have. But the reason why we're offering this as an ethics event then is because interdisciplinary collaboration is actually very, very important to the BCBA code. And what I think that I would like you guys to focus in on today, I don't know if we've got any people who need CEUs today, but we developed this as an ethics CEU event. And the things we're gonna be focusing in on are practicing within a scope of competence and collaborating with colleagues. Now this is a series that's gonna happen 5 times over the next 5 years, and I would imagine that it's going to evolve across this span of time. And so for year one, I think the most important thing for us to do right now, before we figure out ways to like adapt it or do better with it, is to turn off the ABA brain. I would like for you guys to pretend like you don't know anything about ABA, and I want you to hear the message as it's being delivered by an allied profession who cares very much about the sorts of children that you guys care about and are approaching it from a slightly different angle. So, you know, put on a different color sunglasses and see the world as pink instead of green. And then, afterwards, my hope is that you do a little bit of introspection and you create like a mental Venn diagram and you do some translation, look for overlap in terms of targets, goals, terminology, and figure out where these two professions overlap, and then figure out where they don't. And where they don't is probably the most interesting and exciting stuff. That's where you're trying to figure out which professions are attending to concepts that are not being attended to by the alternative field. And I think this is where an opportunity for growth is. And certainly the stuff in the middle is really, really important, because if we can translate, we have that ability to code switch, we're going to be more effective collaborators anyways. So from an ethics point of view, my goal for the next 3 of these meetings is, first of all, I just want you guys, I want to expose you all to research from allied fields to inform the conceptualization and operationalization of non-traditional but socially valid targets of therapy, right? So when we get into the internal domain, theoretically, radical behavior analysts like acknowledge that feelings and emotions exist. We don't really study them. These guys do. Right? And so we're going to pay attention to the way that they're talking about it. We're not going to redefine trauma. We're going to understand trauma the way that trauma has been understood, and then go from there. And then maybe we can study it in the future. So objective 2 is to learn the goals, methods, and outcomes of practitioners from allied professions and in order to inform collaborative practice. And then what I'm really excited about is learning objective 3 is to expose you guys to promising interdisciplinary collaborative models of service delivery, which is wraparound services. And so that kind of outlines what I see as being the contribution of the next 3 workshops for you all. And then we'll give Vaba back to regularly programmed activities until the summertime. And that's my whole bit. I think you have an introduction, so.
Hi, guys. First off, thank you for coming. Really quick before I get into intros, I want to do a PSA, because I didn't know this until I became on the Vaba board, and I want to share the wealth. Anyone in your internship that supervises Vanderbilt students that you're accruing hours for has a free Vaba membership. So any of like the BCBAs and those placements that aren't attached to Vanderbilt can come for free and get free CEUs, and that's definitely a plus for them. CEUs are usually a few $100s, if not more. So the board is going to do a better job of communicating that to our community partners, but definitely try and disseminate it within your placement when you can, and when there's events, especially that are like relevant to their work. Okay, so first up, she's not speaking today, but she's going to be with us all 3 workshops, and she's the brains behind it with Joe, is Carrie Virgo. She works at, in a section of the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. Carrie has acted as the director of the Office of Children, Young Adults, and Families for the past 2 years. She oversees 21 programs and over $18 million of a budget to provide services and supports for children's mental health throughout the state. They serve people ages 0 to 3 and their families. Carrie has an associate's in criminal justice and a bachelor's in psychology from Purdue, Fort Wayne, and she went on to get a master's in public management from IU. Next, we also have Melissa Mcgee. Melissa works at the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth, TCCY, which we'll be seeing shortly, that acronym, more acronyms for you, as the Children's Mental Health Advocacy Director. Their mission is to lead systems improvement for all children and families through data-driven advocacy, education, and collaboration. Melissa has a bachelor's in nutrition from the University of Mississippi, a master's of science from University of Memphis in clinical nutrition, and a master's of art from New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary in marriage and family therapy. Please help me welcome Melissa.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank you.
Those were a lot of words to say that I've gone to school a lot, so evidently I like it, right? So congrats on, I think you are all in your graduate programs, is that right? So congrats on that and best of luck to you. I also am trying to finish a PhD, which makes me sometimes want to cry and sometimes want to do a dance, so you never know, right? So we're super thankful to be with you today. I get to work with Carrie in everyday life. We work for the state of Tennessee. I loved when Ellie was like, oh, acronyms. We live in acronyms. So my hope for today, I sent some objectives. I don't know if you care or if you saw them, but Melissa's hope for today is that you walk away with some knowledge that's new or updated, or maybe even, like Dr. Lambert said, just a different view. We take off our normal glasses and we put on some new glasses just to see a little bit differently. I'm a counselor. It's what I've done. Well, you heard I was a dietitian for a long time and just wasn't my cup of tea necessarily. So I went back to school, got a degree in counseling, and I have mostly, almost exclusively worked with teenagers and their families. So I haven't worked necessarily with the babies. I don't always understand them, but teenagers I got, man. They're my people. And so I've done most of my work with that. But the interesting thing about that is that our kids, our adolescents and young adults are the people who have had potential adversity earlier in childhood and it hasn't been mitigated. So what we're seeing is outcomes from early life stuff that haven't been addressed, and they're coming out as our kids get older, and they continue, and we'll learn more about that. So today, we're going to take a deep dive into the role of life experiences in brain development, shaping brain development. We're going to talk about ACEs. Has everybody heard of ACEs? Do I need to spell that out? Praise Jesus. Good job, guys. So we're going to talk about ACEs, but more importantly, we're going to talk about brain development and what happens. Now, I feel confident this is going to be a skimming of the surface of what you probably already know. We hope it's just arranged in a little bit of a fashion that you may not have seen just yet. So Building Strong Brains Tennessee, in a nutshell, is a multidisciplinary, cross-sector collaboration in Tennessee. Our mission is this, to change the culture of Tennessee so that everything we do, what you see there, our philosophy, our policies, which means laws. So if you're an advocate or you like to do advocacy, I like you a lot. I like all of you. But if you want to do advocacy, rock on, because we need lots of good voices out there. Our programs and our practices for our children, youth, and young adults reflect the latest brain science so that we can prevent and mitigate the impact of ACEs, right? So we're just trying to shift into supporting early childhood instead of addressing the outcomes later. Does that make sense? It's kind of, I've said this a lot today. I think it was Nelson Mandela. You can correct me if it's not. Who said, we've got to stop pulling people out of the river downstream and head upstream and figure out why they're falling in the first place. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to head upstream. The cool thing about this work is it is a collaboration between public sector, which is government, and private sector, which is all our business folks, our nonprofits, all the people who work out there and every day. And so that's so cool because you don't get that a whole lot. Even in government, we all kind of live on our own islands from time to time. And so it's nice that this has pulled us all together. So that being said, if you have questions or you think what I say might be a little crazy, you're welcome to ask and raise your hand and talk with me because I get tired of hearing myself talk. And I was telling Carrie on our way in, somehow I scheduled 3 presentations today. So my apologies that you are the third, and it might be a little tricky, and I might just say a lot of words in an order that doesn't make sense. So ask questions, talk back to me in a very kind and gentle way. I'm good with that. But you're welcome to just entertain yourself however possible. So really, what we know about healthy child development is that it requires a strong foundation, like you see right here. Because we know that when kids have a strong, healthy, developing foundation, it's going to lead to these 4 pillars. It's going to lead to better educational achievement, more economic productivity, a more responsible citizen, and better lifelong health. And when we can build children who have these 4 pillars as their stability, then they're going to become more successful parents of the next generation. They're going to be more involved in their communities, and our economy is going to be stronger. So we talk about this all the time. Some of you may not even have, most of you may not even have children yet. I'm old and I don't have children. So people are like, why do you care? Well, because I'm nice, number one. But number 2, it's about our whole. as a whole, our society becomes better, right? When everyone prospers and everyone has the support that they need. So when we build this super strong foundation, we're lifting all these other things up and building the next generation. In our work, a lot of times we call that 2-gen, the second generation, right? So we're doing a lot of 2-gen, 3-gen type of work. So I get a little happy with, you gave me a clicker and a pointer. Y'all are in trouble now. But what we're going to do is to talk about that today. We're going to focus on 4 core areas of development. And so those concepts come from Harvard Center for the Developing Child. If you haven't piddled around on their website, go for it. It's super fun. There's so much information there, quality information, and they just want you to use it. They just scatter it out for free. And so it's great. And they've developed 4 core concepts here. The first one is brain architecture. The second, serve and return, then toxic stress and resilience. So we're going to use these 4 concepts to shape our conversation today. The first one is brain architecture. And so I'll show you a little video, provided we have time. I love to talk. And so we might run out of time and we might skip videos, but these are all available to you on their website. You can access them, watch them all day long.
A child's experiences during the earliest years of life have a lasting impact on the architecture of the developing brain. Genes provide the basic blueprint, but experiences shape the process that determines whether a child's brain will provide a strong or weak foundation for all future learning, behavior, and health. During this important period of brain development, billions of brain cells called neurons send electrical signals to communicate with each other. These connections form circuits that become the basic foundation of brain architecture. Circuits and connections proliferate at a rapid pace and are reinforced through repeated use. Our experiences and environment dictate which circuits and connections get more use. Connections that are used more grow stronger and more permanent. Meanwhile, connections that are used less fade away through a normal process called pruning. Well-used circuits create lightning-fast pathways for neural signals to travel across regions of the brain. Simple circuits form first, providing the foundation for more complex circuits to build on later. Through this process, neurons form strong circuits and connections for emotions, motor skills, behavioral control, logic, language, and memory during the early critical period of development. With repeated use, these circuits become more efficient and connect to other areas of the brain more rapidly. While they originate in specific areas of the brain, the circuits are interconnected. You can't have one type of skill without the others to support it. Like building a house, everything is connected, and what comes first forms a foundation for all that comes later.
So if I were to ask you, the important thing that you took from that video, give me like a snapshot. It's one thing you took. Don't cheat. Don't be scared either. Yeah.
The brain for baby is kind of where it all starts.
Yeah. Good job. What's your name? Sarah. Thank you. Melissa. I don't even know if I did that. Anybody else? What'd you take? Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Oh my gosh, we'll talk more about that. That's so fun. Yes. What's your name? Gina. And I called you a ma'am. I'm sorry if I didn't use correct pronouns. I'm trying to remind myself to be observant of that. So, all right, that's good. I'll let 2 of you go. Now you've all warmed up. I'm going to talk to you more, so just so you know it's coming. So that's key, right? Because brain architecture is how we kind of talk about the building of a brain. So Harvard partnered with an organization called Frameworks, which is a communication science nonprofit. Really cool people, man. They're smart folks who look at how we use language and whether or not it actually does what we want it to do. And so Harvard worked with Frameworks to develop what we refer to as metaphors. So this brain architecture is the first metaphor we're going to talk about. And what you heard is that brains are built over time, and it matters what order they're built in, right? Because one thing builds on another, builds on another. You're not going to go from walking all the way to solving the most complex physics, right? It's a process that builds on each other, and it matters how it happens because skill builds on skill. And also what we know is that this piece right here, the cognitive, emotional, social, we talk about that being braided, like a tightly braided rope that you cannot separate or it just annihilates the whole thing. It's not going to be useful at all. So in the past, we've seen some legislation proposed that said social emotional learning doesn't need to be in our schools. Has anybody heard of something like that? The key is you can't take it out. You can't just piece and parse it out so that you can have what you want. Because if kids aren't ready to be in school because of what's happening at home or what happened yesterday at school, they're not going to learn. The academic piece, the cognitive piece isn't going to be there. So what we're doing is trying to educate folks on how all these things are so tightly braided together like that rope that we have to have all of them very well supported, because what happens early matters later. It's much harder to fix later than it is to address early. And so really that's what we're talking about. So they said in there, the building, to some degree, the building of a brain is like the building of a house. It has to have a strong, see, you did so good. Yes, has to have a strong foundation. It matters what you build on, because even the, wobbliest foundation, or even one with a little scooch of a crack, it's going to matter when you start building. Now, I am not a builder. It probably doesn't surprise you. But when you build a house, it matters how things happen, right? You're going to get that foundation sturdy and ready to rock and roll before you do anything else. And then there's a specific order. Framing happens, and then at some point, electrical things go in, and then sheetrock goes in, and so it's very specific. That's why we talk about the building of the brain is like a building of a house, because what happens first matters later, and it takes all different folks to do it, right? It's not just one person. There's a contractor for a reason. Has anybody, y'all are still maybe young, but has anybody bought a house and gone through an inspection? Or your family? Yeah. And so, yeah. So you put a contract on a house typically. Now we're going to exclude what's happening in today's world because that doesn't count. It's not normal life, and I hope it fixes itself before you guys get ready to buy a house. But that's a side note. But you're going to get an inspection, and if that inspection comes back, you've put a bid in, they're like, yeah, we'll take your money. That sounds good. And you're like, okay, well, we're going to inspect the house and make sure I'm getting my money's worth. The inspection comes back and says, hey, it looks good, but there's something going on with the foundation. Most of the time, a buyer is going to be like, peace out, dude, I'm not taking it. Because a foundation issue is not going to be a one-time fix. It's going to be something that you continue to address for the rest of the life of that house. That's the same with our developing brains. A foundational issue in a developing brain can be addressed and mitigated later, but it's going to continue to be addressed more, maybe less and less as a child gets older, but there's probably still going to be remaining pieces of that going forward. So that's what we're talking about. Because this is a piece you probably know, is that there are more than 1 million new neural connections every single second in a young child's brain. And this is where you see things starting to come together as a newborn, and then at 6 months, and then man, by 2 years, there's a whole lot going on, right? Anybody have a 2-year-old? Had a 2-year-old? They are busy. They are active. They ask 1,000 questions, and then they're out like a light for the most part, right? So they're going, and then all of a sudden they're asleep, and thunder may not wake them up. That's because there's so much stuff going on up there, man. There's a lot. And so that's when our brain starts to think, hey, we got to start figuring this stuff out, man, because I'm going to need to know how to signal that I'm hungry when I'm hungry and not something else. So that's where, Gina, we come into that whole strengthening of connections, right? The more something is used, the stronger that connection is going to be. And so that means it's going to hang around longer. So when that pruning starts and we start to back out of the things we don't use as much, I always like to say for me, that was Spanish, because I'm of the age where it just wasn't important to know another language. And so I took 10th grade Spanish and have a conversation about Frederica and Henrietta going to the market, and that's all I got. And so if I try to learn Spanish now, because that has been pruned away at an early age, it's going to be harder for me. It's going to take more effort. But what happens is those things that are used the most if you're bilingual, trilingual, whatever, those are going to be solidified here, and the things you don't use as much are going to be pruned away. Unfortunately, when we talk about childhood development, that could be negative things as well. That could be neglect. So if a mom is struggling with maybe postpartum depression, she may not have the capacity to take care of that child in the way that we say is the best, right? Which is probably good. She may not even realize she's going through postpartum depression. And so she's doing the best she can. But she still has a child that may not have all their needs being met. So what's going to be pruned away is the attachment, the interaction, we'll get to that in just a minute, and more so that child trying to soothe themselves. That's not what we want to strengthen, right? But unfortunately, that's where some of our children, their neural connections are the strongest, is in that self-preservation place. So that's why we're talking about such early childhood development. And so you're like, well, that's really cool. But if we're building brain architecture, how do we do that? I'm so glad you asked. So we do it through things like serve and return relationships. And so we get to watch a little video here as well.
The key to forming strong brain architecture is what's known as serve and return interaction with adults. In this developmental game, new neural connections form in the brain as young children instinctively serve through babbling, facial expressions, and gestures. And adults return the serve, responding in a very directed, meaningful way. It starts very early in life when a baby coos and the adult interacts and directs the baby's attention to a face or hand. This interaction forms the foundation of brain architecture upon which all future development will be built. It helps create neural connections between all the different areas of the brain, building the emotional and cognitive skills children need in life. For example, here's how it works for literacy and language skills. When a baby sees an object, the adult says its name. This makes connections in the baby's brain between particular sounds and their corresponding objects. Later, adults show young children that those objects and sounds can also be represented by marks on a page. With continued support from adults, children then learn how to decipher writing and eventually to write themselves. Each stage builds on what came before. Ensuring that children have adult caregivers who consistently engage in serve and return interaction, beginning in infancy, builds a foundation in the brain for all the learning, behavior, and health that follow.
So after watching that, what would you think might be good examples of serve and return from hearing the explanation on the video? Like a TV commercial you've seen or interaction you've had with a kid. What do you think would be a good example? Yeah, tell me your name. Claire. Yeah. What else? We all know you have conversations with babies that are not having coherent conversations with you back, right? What about the Geico commercial? Has everyone seen that where the dad's walking through the house and he has a kid on each leg and he's like stomping through? Just me? It's really fun. I don't watch a lot of TV, but when I see stuff like that, I think about it. I'm like, oh, serve and return, how cool is that? Typically, and we can move forward a little bit here, serve and return is what builds our brain architecture because children are going to naturally reach out to us. Doesn't matter if you're mama, caregiver, daddy, whomever, they're going to reach out to you when you're in a booth at a restaurant. Maybe during the pandemic it slowed down, but when you're in a booth and there's a little kid in the booth behind you and they're kind of looking over and you're like, that's serve and return. And the key is kids are reaching out to us for that interaction. If you have children, men, women, whomever, they're going to grab. Why do you think a lot of people with long hair cut their hair when they have babies? Because babies are constantly grabbing at shiny things and hair and ears, and they're just reaching out for something, babbling at us, and we're like, what are you doing, little bit? And we're just talking to them like they, A, know exactly what we're talking about, and B, we know exactly what they're saying back to us, right? We're going to shape that conversation as best we can. But that is why, because they naturally reach out to us. You guys are behavior analysts one day, right? Or already are. And so that is so key. And it's essential for those brain circuits to develop well. So imagine what happens in normally developing children when a tragedy happens or someone's struggling with a mental health issue, it's going to disrupt that, right? And so we want to build strong brains as long as we can because there are going to be disruptions. Life isn't perfect. We also want to make sure that we support all the systems out there that help support kids and families. That's why we're coming to talk to you. You're a little bit different than my normal audience, but I love that. That's our goal. I'd go talk to the Kiwanis Club if they'd let me. They haven't invited yet, so if anybody has some connections, hook me up, okay? But I'll talk to whoever will listen because it matters in every single avenue where we live and work and play. And so that's why, because quality relationships matter early and they continue to matter on up into adolescence. You know, our brain malleability or the plasticity we have, it's really high early on, right? Like massive. And it drops off around 3, 4, 5 years old. But the cool thing, and this is why I like working with teenagers, is you get a little bump in there at the adolescent phase. And you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get you now. We're gonna take care of some of this stuff, right? It's not as big, but we still get a little bump in there. And so we wanna take advantage of everything we can throughout those seasons to provide support for things that may have already happened and we didn't even know this child or this family, moving on into adulthood so that they can go be as prosperous as they want to be. So this is a really, really dated study. But it's really cool. I heard somebody say on the news, it may have been today, and I don't remember, maybe they were talking about like a high temperature or something. And they're like, oh, this dates back 30 years to 1991. And I was like, whoa. Because when I say 30 years ago, I mean like 1971, which a lot of you never even thought about before. But, you know, that's kind of what I think about. But no, 1991 is when this study was done. But it's a really cool study. It looked at how mothers interacted with their children. Now, only moms. Back in those days, we didn't pay a lot of attention to other than moms. Sorry about that, dads or caregivers, whomever. And so that looked at how they interacted speech-wise with their kids. And they assigned a level of speech, high, medium, or low. And so the green line is the low level of speech, the red is the mid, and the purple or bluish is the high level of speech, so the top line. And what happened is they started looking at the kids at about a year old, 12 months, and all the kids just had a few little words in their vocabulary, not a lot. But by the time they got out to 26 months, there was a huge difference in the number of words the kids had in their vocabulary. So moms who had a low level of speech with their kids really only had about 200 words in their vocabulary, as opposed to the high level speech moms who had almost 800. Why do you think? Or what would you assume from that data? Yeah. Exactly right. What's your name? Maggie. Oh, there's a pup back there with a bandana on that says Maggie. Carrie's just proud I didn't go pet the pup. But yes, Maggie, that's right. So that's so true. What would keep a mom, and you can answer or any of your friends can, from interacting with their child if they know that? What do you think would keep a mom from interacting with their child more, speech-wise? Yeah, I know the answer. Don't tell me. Ooh, tell me. Claire. Okay, go ahead. Yes. So what if we have a low-income mom who has to work 2 jobs? She works a 7 to 3 and a 3 to 11. So she comes home at 11 and little Billy Bob is in bed. She goes in, kisses him goodnight. Maybe he stirs, maybe he doesn't. She gets up in the morning at 6. She kisses little Billy Bob on the face at 6:45 when she walks out the door. And then she's gone again from 7 to 3 and 3 to 11. That's poverty, potentially. Mom is working to try and take care of her family. So my training as a counselor tended, and all love to my training, I think it was just the old school way of thinking, to immediately default to places like, oh, that mom's neglecting her kid. She's not talking to him. It didn't teach me to think socially. It didn't teach me to think, what are the barriers? Maybe the mom with the green is postpartum depression. And she just doesn't have words. And she doesn't know she needs words. And she doesn't know she has postpartum depression. Like, those are things that we don't think about. Or maybe that mom is a dental hygienist, a dentist, and they've got their hands in people's mouths where they can't talk back. So they don't talk as much as a mom who, say, maybe a hairstylist. So maybe Purple Line Mom is a hairstylist. You know what I'm talking about? They know your whole life story, don't they? I moved here in I'm going to date myself. I've been here a long time, 1996. And my hairstylist and I have been together since 1999. We go way back. She knows my story, all of it, right? So that mama goes and picks up Billy Bob from the nursery, and on their way home, she's just like, what'd you do today, Billy Bob? Did you have fun? Who'd you play with? And Billy Bob's like, I played in the sandbox, and we built this, and I talked to Susie Q. Like, that's just who she is, right? So a lot of times, it's just about who is the parent, what their circumstances are. And so our goal is, if we've got a mom that's working 2 jobs because she needs to make ends meet, how do we better support a family? I'm not saying we have to start throwing money at everybody, but there's got to be a way we support families and kids better to improve even this piece. Does that make sense? Questions, thoughts, comments, snide remarks? Okay. So we've talked a lot about the early childhood piece, but we talked also about that bump in adolescent. So we don't want to forget that, because when we get into those early to mid-teen years, kids have an opportunity to kind of remodel. Do a little business in the brain, if you speak. So they go through that peak time to help rebuild a few things. And one of those ways they do it is through what we call air traffic control. And that's where they're learning how to manage all those streams of information that are coming at them at one time. Like, do I go get a cookie, or do I go do my homework, or do I talk to Billy Bob on the phone because we've been in nursery school since nursery school together. Like, trying to figure all those things out. It's also a time where it's that use it or lose it. Like it starts to prune again. And so you've built more connections, and then it's going, okay, we got more stuff going on in there. We're going to have to start pruning a few things out. So you want them to use the good stuff, use the resources, use the supports that they have access to, and help build that. And then that integration across the sides, the hemispheres of the brain, right? We want to help them not only be emotional, but also be rational. And we all know teenagers aren't the most rational folks at times. So we want to help them build and support that. So that's why we continue to talk about this all the way through to adolescence and young adulthood, because we know the developing brain isn't fully developed until mid to late 20s for women and men. And so we got lots of opportunity to do our thing. We just want to do it early because we get the most bang for our buck. So we have brain architecture is our structure of our brain. Serve and return builds the brain architecture, so something's got to disrupt it, right? So that's the topic of toxic stress.
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing newly. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
So toxic stress is a little bit of a tougher conversation because it just is, it's It's one of those things that you're like, ugh, I just don't want to talk about it because it's a lot. But what has happened is Harvard has kind of developed levels of stress, so to speak. So when we think about positive stressors, and you know our body responds to stress, right? Can anyone tell me how you, if you don't mind sharing, please do not, if you do not want to share, don't feel pressured. But if you don't mind, do you have a physical response to stress? So like when I get stressed, really, really, really stressed, I scratch the top of my legs, not standing up because that would be weird. But when I'm sitting in my desk, like I'll catch myself scratching my legs and I'm like, what's going on in my life? Anybody? Yeah. Maggie, say it again, clench your jaw. Yes. Anybody else? Yeah. I might be sweating right now. This is the first in-person presentation I've done in like 2 years. What's your name? Kelly, nice to meet you. Fidget. What's your name? Ange. Headaches, stomach aches, twitches, eye twitches. Like we all have response to stressors, right? Good or bad. Like this is a good stressor for me, but like I said, it's been 2 years since I've talked to people like this and holding a microphone. I'm like, I don't hold microphones. I just wander around and talk. But it's good stress. So when we think about positive stressors, especially in kids, think about all those things they're doing for the first time. Going to school. You know, you've got a caregiver dropping a child off at kindergarten or Head Start their first day, and that little child may be like, whoa, this is not what I asked for. I don't know any of these people. I'm going to not have a good moment right now. And so caregiver's freaking out, child is freaking out, and the teacher's like, I got this. Trust me. And within like 30 minutes, you look on the computer or the app or whatever it is these days, and Billy Bob is just having a big time playing trains in the corner. And the teacher's like, we got this. And so that's called positive stress. And when our body reacts, this is so simplistic. Know that I know that. Our body releases cortisol, right, as a stress hormone. When that goes up, that tells your system, hey, look, something's going on, dude. Something's going on. So your body literally has to start responding to this increase in cortisol. So in positive stressors, you see your cortisol level go up, and as soon as that stressor is relieved, it goes almost back down to normal. It's like, so you take a kid to get their shots, and you're doing everything. Ice cream, trains, dolls, costumes, whatever you want. You got it. We're just going to go get these shots. And so they're crying, and it's 14 people holding them down to get their shot. And as soon as their shot is over, it's smiles, it's beet red eyes and cheeks, tears, and they're like, can we go get ice cream now? Right? That's a positive stressor. They have safe, stable, nurturing relationships with adults that are right there saying, I got you. I got you. And you know what? I do got you. And so then immediately they're like, all right, ice cream, I'm in, yeah, I'll go get ice cream too, let's do it. But that's positive stress. When those stress hormones, not just cortisol, that's one of the main ones, but all of them are able to shoot up and then shoot right back down when the stressor's over. We move to the next one, which is called tolerable stress. And these are the events that happen that are inevitable. Deaths in the family, moves, illnesses, mental health, substance abuse concerns, but they're addressed, right? They're able to be addressed. There's what we call that safe, stable, nurturing relationship in this child's life that says, I got you, and this isn't easy, but we're going to do it. It doesn't have to be a caregiver. We hope that it is, but it doesn't have to be a caregiver. It's just someone, so that when that stress hormones go up, then they go up, and as you get over that hump of that stressor, they start to go back down, but it's going to take a little while, right? It's going to be a minute as the child watches me model, how do I handle a death in our family? How do I handle an unexpected event? And they watch us, and they see us, and then that helps their stressor also go back down to where eventually it'll hit back more toward normal levels. The tricky part comes when there's what we call this toxic stress piece. And this is ongoing, prolonged exposure to events that are literally harmful for the child. So you see the blocks up there say addiction, sexual abuse, neglect, or emotional abuse, also neglect, things like that. And so what happens there is a child does not have that safe, stable, nurturing relationship with an adult, so that when they encounter a parent who has an untreated substance use addiction issue, they don't have anyone to say, I got you. And so that child begins to navigate that on their own. The pruning that happens is the trust. They can't trust this caregiver for whatever reason. So they start to do things on their own. So when we see our teenagers come in front of us and they do maybe not the smartest things, as we learn more about their histories, we understand they've had to learn how to take care of themselves. And so when they see a police officer, it doesn't mean trust or safety. It means you're an authority. No one has taken care of me before. You're not going to either. And so instead of just being a defiant act, it's really more of a response and a survival act. And so I know you guys have probably learned that before, but what matters too is as those stress hormones go up in toxic stress, there's literally nothing there that says, I got you, to help those hormones come back. So then their body is functioning at this elevated stress level all the time. And so your body's not meant to do that. So when we think about ACEs, which we'll get into more in a minute, and the physical outcomes of ACEs that they found, this is part of the reason why. Because your body is literally functioning in survival mode all the time. I worked in a school over here, let me think about where I am. It's over off of Lafayette Street, so off of downtown. And I was a counselor, not a teacher. Y'all are all kind of education-oriented folks. Yeah, I love education. I was a counselor and placed in it's a school for kids. We used to call it the last stop on the train. And all of our kids who came to us had to have emotional designation, an ED. Am I using the right words? You guys have some acronyms too, now that we're talking about this. An ED on their IEP. So when they got in trouble at their home school, instead of just sending them to ALC, they sent them to us so that we could do therapy, case management, family therapy, whatever. And so some of my kids lived in this state all the time. They lived in a state of alarm their entire lives. So much so that it wasn't a state of alarm to them, it was life. Does that make sense? So that's why we're talking about how this toxic stress affects them, because a lot of times it's all they know. One of my kids that I had there, she was 17, pregnant with her third child, and we were talking about what she wanted to do. She was smart, man. She was, in my little middle-class white life, I was like, she rocks. She could do anything. And her response back to me was, I really just want to live next door to my mom. And what that meant was, she wanted $50 a month housing at James Casey Housing Development next to her mom with her kids. And I was devastated. And I walked into supervision with my boss, and I was like, oh, woe is me. I'm a horrible case manager and therapist. I suck with these, sorry, I don't know if I can say that word, recording. But I stink with these kids, like I'm not doing my job. My supervisor was a rock star, and she was like, hey, it's not about you. And I was like, oh, like devastated. But she was absolutely right, because her next sentence was, it's all she knows. And that changed everything about how I did my practice. Because then it was that, angels singing down from heaven, that sort of thing. And I was like, I get it now. Like, I can't fix everybody, but I can walk with them while we address their needs, right? Because Carrie will be proud of me here. I'm not the professional of their life. They're the professional of their life, including our kids and our families, right? So when we think about toxic stress and what that means, you guys have probably seen this diagram, right? It's a PET scan, kind of looks at heat and activity. And the key is that this is, it says abused. We use the word neglected because that's really what it is. And in my training, we were not really taught that neglect was equally as neurotoxic as abuse. And so I think that has shifted in recent years, but we want to remind people that neglect is equally as neurotoxic as abuse. And so be clear, it's very hard to report to DCS for neglect when it's not like a hoarding situation or something like that, right? And it's hard for DCS when they go into the home to substantiate findings when it isn't obvious, right? But neglect can happen in so many ways. That's why it's so important. We want to support parents and caregivers and our kids because it takes us all. So I won't belittle this point, but just remember that this brain and this brain are the same age, 3-year-old little boy, but this brain grew up in a healthy developing space, and this brain grew up in an orphanage over in Eastern Europe in the early 90s when they literally propped a bottle on a towel to feed the baby. So there was literally minimal interaction, serve and return, remember that part? Literal minimal serve and return for the child on the right. Now, can we help this child? 100% we can help this child. It's going to take more money, more resources, and more time to move this child to where they typically developing child would be, right? So that's why toxic stress is so important. This piece, you all know this as well, probably, I would imagine, but our little piece right here, this amygdala, in my training as a therapist, we go through something, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, TFCBT, it's like a cheerleader. But we talk about this amygdala a whole lot because it's like the alarm clock that goes off when we get stressed. When I'm scratching my legs, when you're doing whatever it is your response is to stress, your amygdala is like, hey, talking to you, and it's trying to get your attention because it sends out this signal that says something's going on, something's going on. It's like someone tapping on you constantly. When we have kids that grow up in this toxic stress situation, that tapping just becomes background to the point they don't even know the tapping is there anymore. It's just what it is. I tell people all the time, those alarm clocks that are round and have the 2 metal things and the metal clanger that will wake up the absolute dead, those are what the amygdala is. It's that piece that is trying to get your attention to say, hey, please do something, please do something, please do something, please do something. But when our kids have literally been their whole life with an alarm clock metal clanger going off, they don't know what to do when it stops. They know what to do when it's going off. They don't know what to do when it stops. So when you run into your kids that you work with, even the ones that as ABA, you're kind of working with, they may have a different developmental skills, different developmental levels, but there's still ways we can recognize those stressors in them, those things that matter the most, and try to help. Because our brains kind of develop generically from back to front, right? Our more complex skills are the last to form up here in our prefrontal cortex. If we can never get them out of our more simple skill space, we're never going to get to this higher thinking place. So when you have a teenager and they're like, that kid is 18, he doesn't even know what he's doing. Right, because he had a brain, a toxic stress event happen when he was 12. That's never been addressed. So he hasn't been able to move to where a lot of 18-year-olds can move. So helping us understand that and address it is really what's changed a lot of the way that I practice as I've learned more and more and more. You've probably heard about epigenetics. It's literally like the study of how the gene works kind of above the main level. And so if you're really looking for cool fields, also a very cool one if you want a dual PhD or something crazy like that. But really what happened here is we just are kind of opening the conversation around epigenetics because it's still pretty new, but there were some researchers down at Emory and they were looking at trauma memory, and they took some mice. Now granted, mice are not humans. It has not been extrapolated out to human study just yet. But they took some mice and they had a papa mouse and a mama mouse, and they were like, hey, we're going to shock Papa Mouse on his feet every time we put this certain smell of cherry blossoms into his crate. And they did that consistently for 2 weeks. And they measured his physical response. And what do you think happened? Lots of physical response, right? His heart rate went up, his breathing rate went up, his glucose went up, like lots of physical things happened. So then they stopped it. And then 6 weeks later, they bred Papa Mouse and Mama Mouse, and they had Junior Mouse. And so they're like, all right, Junior, let's see what happens when we introduce this cherry blossom smell into your crate. Now, they didn't shock Junior's feet. They only introduced the cherry blossom smell. And Junior exhibited almost exact same symptoms as Papa Mouse when Papa Mouse was being shocked. So they're like, okay. Maybe since Junior Mouse grew up with Papa Mouse, has been living with Papa Mouse, environmentally with Papa Mouse, maybe that's what caused this. So they went over here to other baby mama, way over here, who had never even met Papa, but they artificially inseminated her, never let Junior Mouse number 2 get to know Papa or anything, and what they found is the exact same thing. And that both of the junior mice had increased receptors in their nostrils to the cherry blossom smell. And so they're like, wow, that's very interesting. And they even replicated that out to a second generation. So that's what we're looking at. Again, it's not out to human study yet. We're not, oh my. That's probably something to do with my presentation, sorry. But we're not out to human studies yet, but just beginning to learn more and more about that genetic transmission of trauma and how that affects generations that may not even know they're connected. So we think about that as we get on out to the adolescent phase, and we get to that place where it's like air traffic control, and how do we help kids start to understand, because that executive functioning piece, which I don't have to teach you guys about, I don't think, but is really just the group of skills that helps us sort everything out. It helps us take the streams of information we're getting, identify which ones are the ones we need to be focused on, and which ones we can put off for a little bit. Now, sometimes mine is better than others, and it depends on what's the most pressing, right? So that's the key, because it really is one of the most important things when it comes to school readiness, is the ability to manage those executive functioning skills. That's why we continue to bring this back to all different disciplines. I feel like it might explode here in a minute. But, that's the key, is just really learning kind of what's going on with that. I don't see any little notifications, so we're just going to continue to live our life. So we want to continue to remember that. This is a video that's also free to you. You can get it off of our website, tn.gov/TCCY. I can send all this stuff to you, or to Dr. Lambert or somebody, Ellie, somebody. And she can get them, they can get them to you. But it's going to summarize what we've talked about so far. It's like 4 minutes maybe, I can't remember. But you can use it anywhere, in your housing. My friends laugh because they all know about ACEs now, and they talk about it. And the other day we were doing something, and one of them was talking to someone else, and they brought up the fact that, well, do they have good support at home? And I was like, oh, I'm so proud. And she works in the real estate business. I'm like, oh, so proud of you. I like to run, mostly because I like to eat, so they have to hear a lot about it while we're running. And so that's what I'm talking about. Just share it with whomever you want. And this is one of those videos that if you don't like to talk, you can just play this video and it'll do all the talking for you. Wow. That feels loud. Is it? Okay.
Science tells us that the experiences we have in the first years of our lives actually affect the physical architecture of the developing brain. This means that brains aren't just born, they're also built over time based on our experiences. Just as a house needs a sturdy foundation to support the walls and roof, a brain needs a good base to support all future development. Positive interactions between young children and their caregivers literally build the architecture of the developing brain. Building a sturdy foundation in the earliest years provides a good base for a lifetime of good mental function and better overall health. So just how is a solid brain foundation built and maintained in a developing child? One way is through what brain experts call serve and return interactions. Imagine a tennis match between a caregiver and a child, but instead of hitting a ball back and forth across the net, various forms of communication pass between the two, from eye contact to touch, from singing to simple games like peekaboo. These interactions, repeated throughout a young person's developing years, are the bricks that build a healthy foundation for all future development. But another kind of childhood experience shapes brain development too, and that's stress. Good kinds of stress, like meeting new people or studying for a test, are healthy for development because they prepare kids to cope with future challenges. Another kind of stress, called toxic stress, is bad for brain development. If a child is exposed to serious ongoing hardships like abuse and neglect, and he has no other caregiver in his life to provide support, the basic structures of his developing brain may be damaged. Without a sturdy foundation to properly support future development, he's at risk for a lifetime of health problems, development issues, even addiction. It's possible to fix some of the damage of toxic stress later on, but it's easier, more effective, and less expensive to build solid brain architecture in the first place. One of the things that sturdy brain architecture supports is the development of basic emotional and social skills, an important group of skills which scientists call executive function and self-regulation can be thought of like air traffic control in the child's mental airspace. Think of a young child's brain as the control tower in a busy airport. All those planes landing and taking off, and all of the support systems on the ground simultaneously demand the controller's attention to avoid a crash. It's the same with a young child learning to pay attention, plan ahead and remember, and follow lots of rules. Like all of us, kids have to react to things happening in the world around them, while also dealing with worries, temptations, and obligations on their minds. As these demands for attention pile up, air traffic control helps the child regulate the flow of information, prioritize tasks, and above all, find ways to manage stress and avoid mental collisions along the way. Having this ability is a necessity for positive and level mental health. Developing effective air traffic control, overcoming toxic stress, and building solid brain architecture are things kids can't do on their own. And since strong societies are made up of healthy, contributing individuals, it's up to us as a community to make sure all young people have the kinds of nurturing experiences they need for positive development. To build better futures, we need to build better brains.
I tell people all the time, this music is like in my dreams. It's so pleasant. We actually were able to use this video from what's called the Alberta Family Wellness Initiative, and yep, right there it is. They created this video initially, and then we redubbed it over with a voice that sounded more like Tennessee, and I don't know if that sounds more like Tennessee to you, but anyway, so we appreciate them allowing us to use it. They had Alberta in Canada had an entire province-wide initiative to address early childhood development and ACEs. So that's our first shot. Okay, everybody breathe in. It's a little bit like a fire hose to the face, but we thank you. Questions, thoughts, comments? We're going to dive into ACEs next. Y'all are quiet. Yes, ma'am, in the back. I might need you to say that one more time. Have any of the what been linked with disability identification? Oh, you know what? That's an excellent question. I'm sorry, I'm all up in your space, aren't I? I have not seen a lot of research that's linked to that yet. And we always have questions about kids who have disability and what does that look like? And to be honest, I don't know that there's a ton out there just yet. I mean, ACE research, right, has been around for a while. The original study by Felitti and Anda was done in the mid-90s. Most of you probably weren't even born. All love to you. But that was done in the mid-90s. It probably didn't even pick up steam in our state until around 2010. One of the ladies over in Department of Health was very aware of it. She had come to us from Wisconsin. And so she kind of made us more aware and was like, she was the amygdala. She was like, hey, hey, hey. And she just kept, introducing it. So that was the cool thing that helped get us more aware of it here in Tennessee. But there has been a ton of studies that have come around since Felitti and Anda's first study that have expanded some of the ACEs into more what we call trauma of social location and poverty and racism and bullying. But I don't know a ton about disability, so my apologies. Other questions? And I'm sorry, thank you for repeating that. I'm sorry I made you repeat that 17 times. Other questions? Comments? Snide remarks? All right. So we'll kind of fly through this ACEs stuff. Y'all have this. Do you have this? Okay, just checking. I won't make you watch the video again, anything like that. But we'll kind of fly through it because this is why we're doing all this, right? This seminal study by Felitti and Anda out in California, based out of Kaiser Permanente, really changed the way we see this, right? Because their outcomes were huge in regards. They had over 17,000 participants that were mostly white, mostly college educated, and mostly over the age of 40. That's not the population I deal with as a public health person. Our population looks a whole lot different than that. So that's what even makes these results look even more interesting. Is because I'm getting into my Southern slang now, y'all, with presentation 3, I'm sorry. But that is because We just don't expect this, but how interesting it is that it has allowed us to move to where we've moved in the understanding of longevity of trauma, especially when it's not addressed. So this is the 10 questions, kind of topics that they covered. The original questionnaire was more like 8 with some subs here and there, but this is how we quantify it now. And in their original questionnaire of those over 17,000, you can see the percentages who endorsed each one of these. I'm trying to do this left-handed, and that isn't my strength. Who endorsed each one of these. So this over 40, mostly white, mostly college-educated population, 19.4% of them said they grew up in a house with a caregiver who had a mental illness that was untreated. That's kind of shocking, right? 20.7%, almost, over 1/5, said they grew up in a household where they were sexually abused. That's not what we would expect, right, out of this population. So in their study, they found, 10 is the total, technically. So 64% showed at least one ACE or endorsed at least one ACE, and then 22% endorsed 3 or more. And so the interesting thing that they found is this dose-graded relationship, that as your number of ACEs went up, so did your risk of negative outcomes. Things like decreased health, having obesity, having diabetes, having behavioral health issues, having a dependency on substance use or more mental health concerns, or being a smoker, having more issues with alcohol, things like that. And then their life potential was inverse. They had lower graduation rates. They made less money. They were more likely to miss work. They were more likely to need public benefits when they weren't working. So if you haven't seen this video, it is also, I can send you these links. This is like longer, but it's a real great summary of the ACEs study. You probably have seen it. Has anybody seen the Paper Tigers movie or Resilience? Also excellent, if you haven't seen those. And so Dr. Anda put this together in the first few years that things were really ramping up for them to think about ACEs in a visual picture. And I appreciate that because I'm a visual learner. I'm a processor and a visual learner. So if you show me a picture and then give me time, I'm in. But if you just speak it to me, I'm like, you're going to have to go further than that. So this helped me a ton because what it looked like is as you see the base of the pyramid expand as someone's number of ACEs expands, then you're going to see consequences going up the pyramid. So as a number of ACEs expands, then you're going to have more disrupted neurodevelopment. That's going to lead to more social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. So when you have that, then you're going to try to deal with your stuff with health risk behaviors. So I used to say, my 13-year-old at Johnson School, when he got in trouble at school and the teacher was like, we're going to have to call your parent, and Billy Bob's like, oof, that's not going to go well. Peace out. He would leave school, go out to the corner, smoke a blunt, so that when he got home, he didn't care what caregiver said about whatever happened at school, right? So that's how he dealt with this social emotional stuff, because he was like, well, I'll just smoke and not care, right? So when you do that and you start adopting more health risk behaviors, then you're going to get in trouble with more health issues, more disability problems, and then also more social issues. What does that mean? Jail. So we know that when kids have more interaction with the juvenile justice system, they're at a higher likelihood to be involved with adult justice. So when you're starting to smoke weed on the corner at 13 next to your school, that's probably going to lead you at some point to a interaction with a police officer. And that may or may not go well, right? So you just get up here, and what we learned is that people who had a score of 4 or more on the original study were at 5, had a risk of a 5-year shortened lifespan. And those who had 6 or more had a risk of a 20-year shortened lifespan because of how we moved up on this pyramid. That's fact. It is not fate. So that doesn't mean if you have a score of 6 that you're going to live 20 years less than your neighbor who has a score of 2. Or whatever. That just means if it's not mitigated, if it hasn't been addressed, your risk is higher to have a shortened lifespan. So in Philadelphia, they took the ACE study and they're like, hey, that's cool. However, we're curious about this other stuff over here. So they expanded out their ACEs to address more what we call that trauma of social location. So witnessing violence, living in unsafe neighborhoods, experiencing racism, living in foster care, experiencing bullying. And I want to give you good numbers on this, so I'm going to kind of read this, except I gotta have my glasses. Remember that old part? All right. So what they found was, so this was in 2012 and 2013, because they really wanted to learn more about their community level adversities, right? Because part of our work, especially as we work for state government, is to help support our communities to be healthier. And so what they found is a more racially and socioeconomically diverse population than the original study. And they found out that almost 7 in 10 adults had experienced at least one ACE, and that 2 out of 5 had an ACE score of 4 or more, and that 40% of Philadelphians had experienced 4 or more of the right side ACEs. Not just 4 or more of them all, but 4 or more of the right side ACEs. And so that was really eye-opening to them, and they were able to kind of take that and use it to address things in their city. Now, we're seeing more and more of this expanded type questionnaire going on. There's not a standard version these days. It's kind of used as they need to identify data. So like for my dissertation, I'm looking at ACEs, but I'm looking at ACEs and counselors. So I'm just using the original questionnaire because honestly, it's just easier at this point, just want to be done, right? So, but I'm using the original questionnaire. So it just kind of depends on what you're looking at. They wanted community level, so this is what they did. So when thinking about the trauma of social location, they took this original pyramid that Dr. Anda had come up with, and they expanded it under here to think about historical and social location type things. So you've got kind of similar things going on above the surface, but when you get really below and think about local context, social conditions, and then specifically the historical piece of trauma, it really opened up lenses for them to be able to see, okay, I can take care of Susie Q and Susie Q's mama, but unless I address what's happening in James Casey housing development as a whole, then I'm probably just trying to, kill an ant with a piece of salt or something like that, like just not being as effective as possible. We call these our pie charts, and so if you think about this like an oil spill, and here we're looking at kind of that community prosperity piece, and you think about this black piece as an oil spill, what you can take from this is that people who had an ACE score of 4 or more on that original study, 61% of people who had an ACE score of 4 or more said that drinking caused problems with their friends or family in the past year. 69% expressed serious, persistent mental illness. So when we think about how that affects our community and our support for our communities and where our kids are growing up, then really we're talking about adults that we may have missed as a system, that we just didn't provide the support enough as a system. So this was in Tennessee in 2000. We've done the Burfus study that's words, sorry, I used an acronym, I threw myself off there for a minute. This is a survey that we do through the Department of Health every year. The CDC does it, Department of Health works with them, but if you've ever gotten a call or seen data on the news that says, hey, 3 in 5 Tennesseans eat all their fruits and vegetables every single day. Number 1, they're lying, right? If you don't, you will in research. Number 2, this is what this is the questionnaire that they're asking. Is this BRFIS? It stands for Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance Survey. But they added the ACE questionnaires to the BRFIS questionnaires. So it's gotten better. Originally, you had to have a phone to be able to answer these questions because they called you. Who would not have a phone technically? Kids, who else? Low income, who else? Homeless, who else? Who's the people at the top of the pyramid? Social justice people. People in jail, prisons, right? And there's probably people who have some of our higher incidences of adversity. And so while we know this is an exact science, it helps us have a picture. So in 2017, we got this data out of the Department of Health for our state. And so what it told us was very similar to the original study. 61% had at least one ACE, and 28%, which is higher, more than a quarter, of Tennesseans reported at least 3 ACEs. So just take it for what it's worth and know that we've got our own stuff here in Tennessee. We continue to do this. I think Department of Health continues to get this information. We haven't gotten updated numbers in a minute, so we're hoping to have some of those soon. So that's ACEs. Does that help? Any other questions? Did I not hit things that you thought I might hit? So we've given you kind of the development piece. We took you up with brain architecture and serve and turn, and then we went down the roller coaster with toxic stress, like, oh, that's hard, I don't want to talk about that. And then we hit ACEs, which is just like, man, bottom me out today, right? And so now the cool thing is what we call resilience, what Harvard has studied and helped us frame called resilience. And so we'll give you the frameworks video around resilience.
You can think of child development as a scale that has two sides. A child's scale is placed in a community and has spaces on either side where experiences and environmental influences stack up over the course of development. One side gets stacked with negative factors like stress, violence, and neglect, while the other side gets loaded with positive factors like supportive relationships, skill-building opportunities, and community resources. In the same way that the weight on a teeter-totter affects the direction it tips, the factors that a child is exposed to affect how they turn out, the outcomes of their development. But the way the scale tips and the outcomes a child experiences are also a function of the position of the scale's fulcrum, which is like the genetic makeup of a child. The position of the fulcrum affects how the scale responds to factors that get stacked on either side and how easily it tips. We know that fulcrums start in different places for different children, and that this genetic starting point is an important factor in how a child responds to experiences and how they turn out. We also know that the position of the fulcrum isn't fixed. It's a sliding set point. Over time, the things that load and tip the scale can actually shift the position of the fulcrum. There are points in human development when this fulcrum is easier to shift. During these shiftable periods, our biology can be changed, making us more or less able to withstand negative weight that gets stacked on the scale. One of these shiftable periods is early childhood, and another is adolescence. That's why it's so important to make sure that children have positive experiences, especially early on, and to continue positive supports throughout development. By providing positive experiences during these sensitive periods of development and offloading negative weight, we can shift the fulcrum, making children more able to bear the weight of negative experiences later on, making them more resilient. So resilience isn't just about individual children. It's about the environments and experiences that get stacked on a resilient scale. Resilient societies are those that figure out how to stack more positives than negatives onto the children who will become workers and citizens.
So resilience is one of those things that we hear a lot about. What are some metaphors that you may have heard about being resilient? Yeah, Ellie. Yeah, exactly. What else? Oh, there's one. You live in Nashville, I think, or close by maybe. What's one that you could hear here that would be applicable? Not applicable. Pick yourself up by your bootstraps. What if we don't have straps or boots or a horse, right? Like that's the tricky part, is a lot of conversation you see out there is, well, they just need to get up and try again or do it better or pick themselves up by them bootstraps, whatever the words may be. But what if you don't have any of those things? And so that's where we're trying to reframe resiliency and helping kids specifically learn to be more resilient. And so I love this. It was a little hard for my brain to grasp for a little while. And I don't know why. Maybe that speaks more about me. But I don't know why. But really the key to this is coming in and figuring out, understanding where the fulcrum is to begin with. So when we initially started learning this, we're used to a seesaw where the fulcrum's in the middle and everything just kind of balances out, right? But when we think about children and developing resiliency, what we really want to look at is where does the fulcrum start? Because we want to overload that positive side so that the negative doesn't even stand a chance. So when we understand that we have a family coming in because they're walking through a difficult season, they've got all the resources, all the supports, everyone's coming to therapy, actively engaged, they're doing well in school, they're doing their recommendations, that's a family whose fulcrum's probably way to the left, and they're doing a lot of good things. When we see a family come in, I'll tell you in a minute. When we see a family come in whose fulcrum may be more over to the right-hand side and the negative is outweighing everything else because maybe they lost a caregiver and now they have one income and mom's or dad or caregiver is not sure where they're going to get the money to continue making rent or a mortgage. And then they come into the problem of, okay, we've got rent and mortgage, but what about electricity? What about food? Okay, now we've got to figure out how to get the kids to school because now there's just one of us and I have 2 cars, so I'm going to have to sell a car, right? So we got a family whose fulcrum has been shifted such that the negative is far outweighing the positive. So understanding where our families are coming to us in their life place helps us know what kind of resources to provide or to share with them. They can choose to accept them or not, right? But we help to understand better what that family might need and how much they might need, because one family could need one resource and be like, got it, we're rocking. Another family, you might give them something every time they come to you, a different tool, a different tactic, or whatever, and you just get to the point where you're like, I don't know how to help this family anymore. I got nothing. And so then you're calling your people to be like, help me. I don't know what resources, ideas. You're working with those caregivers to say, you know what do you think? You know your family better than I do. Let's figure this out. It just is different, right, for different families. So when we think about building resiliency, here's some of that language you've heard me say multiple times today. Safe, stable, and nurturing. This is a graphic from the CDC. All of our kids deserve to have a safe environment. They need to be free from physical and emotional harm. They need stability, familiar routines, people, and places. When I first started this work, Carrie and I worked on a grant that was funded by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration of the federal government. And we had a site over in Johnson City, which is way northeast Tennessee. It's more rural up there. Johnson City is a big city, but not really. Is anybody from Johnson City, Tri-Cities area? I love it over there. It's beautiful. But they haven't always had the most access to resources. So we had a grant site up there at a school called Mountain View Elementary. I wanted to say Mount View, but Mountain View Elementary. And so we're, coming from the state, we're all going to go over there and learn more about it. And we head over there, and they were like, we want to take you to the school. I'm like, oh, cool. Yeah, let's do it. And so the best thing about taking us to the school was hearing some of their school personnel and the local behavioral health folks teach us about the population at that school. And the population at that school was a very transient population. And so it was a lot of immigrants, and what they did was they went where the construction was. And so those kids had the potential to not have stability, because they were moving every 3 to 4 months. The key is most of those kids had intact families. And so they had stability in their family. They just didn't have the same stability in the school. So that was able to balance out or to tip toward the positive for those kids. The key for those school personnel were the kids that did not have that in their family, and they only got the school personnel for 3 to 4 months at a time. And so kids need that stability to help them develop fully. They need familiarity, support, and then the nurturing, just to be cared for, to know that it matters what they're doing, how they're learning, who built the sandbox, who built the castle in the sandbox. That matters, right? Some of the questions kids ask us, you're like, oh man, that's cool. I miss asking those kinds of questions, right? Like just to sit back and think about how simple is not the right word because it feels like a demeaning word, but just how pure young children and sometimes even adolescents can be. And so that's what we hope to continue to support and provide that for kids and families in our world. Now the key, and you heard me say this earlier, is it doesn't have to be a caregiver. It can be a teacher, it can be a community center worker, it can be a faith-based person at their church, it can be a volunteer at their daycare, it can be anyone. But whomever they may identify as that safe, stable, nurturing place can provide mitigation for all that toxic stress, and they can keep tolerable stressors from becoming toxic. One of the ladies that we worked with several years ago, she's gone on to go to law school and get her PhD. She would tell her story, and she probably won't mind me doing that, but telling her story for her. But she had 8 ACEs as a youth. She was in 20 some odd foster homes in her teens, and she eventually got a job at Papa John's, and she moved up to become assistant manager, I think. And so because life had been so tough, she got tired of foster homes. She started sleeping in her car outside of Papa John's. And her manager didn't know that. So what she would do is she would close down, like she volunteered to close most nights. On the night she didn't close, she would go stay with friends. But when she closed, she would sleep in her car, and then the next morning she would go to her friend's house after their parents left to go to work and take a shower, and then go to school. And so one night her manager happened to come back by and saw her and was like, "What are you doing?" And so, she told him, and she was a senior, I think, at this point, so she didn't have a ton of time left. So she went to live with he and his family, and that was one of her safe, stable, nurturing relationships, was her manager at Papa John's Pizza. She also can tell you that one of her teachers was her safe, stable, nurturing relationship. And so that's the key, is it might not be a caregiver. We want it to be. We hope it's caregivers, parents. But if it's not, how do we continue to spread this word so that everyone knows it matters how you support children, even in the little things? If you're manning the desk at the Y, then how do you support your kids that come in the door? Just by calling them their pet name or whatever you want to call them? I call everybody Sunshine most of the time. And so even that, just a greeting, a hello, an acknowledgement of who they are. Now, the cool thing is Dr. Christina Bethel has started doing research around positive childhood experiences. How cool is that, right? We talked about adversity a lot. Now we're talking about positive, and it's things like, let me make sure I tell you these, like having someone to talk to about their struggles. They feel free to speak to their family about their feelings. They felt support during difficult times from their family. They have the presence of at least 2 non-parent adults who took genuine interest in them. These are the type of positive childhood experiences. And as you see there, adults who reported 6 to 7 positive childhood experiences versus 0 to 2 had 72% lower odds of having depression or poor mental health. So that's huge, right? Now we have research that's telling us the good stuff. This is what we need to do. This is how we help kids and families, because we're going to continue to improve that air traffic control. We're going to help them focus better, pay better attention, problem solve, plan ahead. Remember, did y'all notice in the video the hot air balloon that was coming in to take him out? Sneak a cookie? Yeah, that's the one I like. I'm like, oh, sneak a cookie got me every time, right? So helping them manage how all those hot air balloons come in and out of their lives. And so that's why we continue to go back across the lifespan and remind people how important this is, because we know when we all work together, that collective ingenuity piece matters, right? Why do you stop at red lights or stop signs? Theoretically, why do you stop at red lights or stop signs? Somewhere, the whole of us said, all right, we all need to stop at this red light. So we all started stopping at the red light. When I was growing up, people smoked everywhere. Restaurants, cars, everywhere. And my mama did not smoke. And so we would walk in a restaurant, and if it was smoky, we would walk out because of her allergies, which is fair, right? And so more so back then, when we were, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm having anomia right now. When we were put off by smoking, I guess is the not nice way to say it, we would leave. As opposed to now, if we go in somewhere and someone lights up a cigarette, or even a vape these days, right? You're like, ooh, don't be doing that. But we are more likely to step up to someone and be like, hey, I'm gonna need you to step over there with that, right? Because our whole collectiveness has shifted in our approach towards smoking. Now, if you smoke, that's your choice. But how it's just, how it is accepted in our society has completely shifted. All because of an ad with a Marlboro Man that y'all probably don't even remember. Like, it really started with those sorts of things. And so we can do this, is the moral. We can shift big things like that. Remember the pie chart and the oil spill around it? If we have a 5K to address mental health, that's awesome. We can raise money, we can raise awareness to help improve mental health situations in our let's say county, Davidson County. If we were to take a whole approach, kind of like you take a paper towel and put it over an oil spill, and if we took our whole approach paper towel on that oil spill slide and addressed ACEs earlier, we could address all of those things at one time. It's pretty stinking cool, right? Now, I'm all about your individual efforts, whatever you want to support. But when we look at the whole, that's what we're talking about. That's what we mean when we say collective impact and collective ingenuity. This is a Heckman study. He's a Nobel Economic Prize winner. I don't think I said that correctly, but he's a smart guy. And so he did this study where he looked at three different early intervention programs. And this is what he found is early intervention is more effective in producing more favorable outcomes later, but it's never too late. That's the key. It's never too late. It just may take more and more time, but it matters. And so what he found is this return on investment sort of thing, that it went all the way from for every $1 that you invest in early childhood, you get a $9 return, down to about a $4 return. But still, hey, I'll take 4 to 1 every day. Take that and win me a $3 investment, right? So that's, when we're thinking about resiliency, we also want to be aware that our mental health matters, right? And we're learning more and more about early childhood mental health and early childhood support, including infant mental health. If anybody's interested in really young child work, there's an association in Tennessee called the Association of Mental Health. God, how do I not know this, Carrie? AIM High. Association of Infant Mental Health in Tennessee, AIM High TN. And so they are doing wonderful work at educating and providing support and what we refer to and they refer to as endorsement for infant mental health providers. So it's a really cool field. If that interests you, we can also get you more information around that. So when we think about the mental health levelness, what we want to do is make sure, I'm surprised there's not a video there. Weird. Anyway, sorry kids. Usually there's a video, but it really is thinking about how a table that's off kilter, have you ever used the sweet and low packs to even out your table at the restaurant, right? It doesn't level itself. Just while you're sitting there, it's not going to magically be like, I got you because you sat down. No, it needs help, right? You're going to put your sweet and low packs underneath there. The same with our kids' mental wellness. They don't have the skills or capabilities yet to know how to level themselves, and so we help bring that to them. We help them know how they level themselves. And so we do that through things like building these executive functioning skills, things where they can participate in sports and understand that better if that's their thing, where they learn how to set goals and plan, where they learn more about mindfulness or journaling or logic puzzles or computer games. I heard Carrie talking about her son who wasn't even interested in college to begin with, and one day came home and said, hey, I got a gaming scholarship, I'm off. And Carrie's like, whoa. And he's doing wonderfully, I think, right? That's been like 2 years ago. Is he a junior? Oh, he's a sophomore. Good, that makes me feel better. But I mean, rock star, like he's killing it over there. Then we think about that 2 and 3 generation approach. I mentioned that earlier, where we're looking at not just the kids we're working with, but their kids and then their kids after that. And so early childhood also helps us produce more healthy parents ongoing and more healthy communities. And that's why we do this, because it continues to build generation to generation. So when we get to those positive childhood experiences and we interlay them on this pyramid that we saw earlier, so if you've got down here how ACEs influence our health and well-being, and then we put in our positive childhood experience, then we're going to start to mess around with ACEs, right? We're going to be like, go away. And so here, you see that we improve our family and community factors, which is going to change some of the roots of this stuff that's going on. And then we don't get the toxic response. And then we see more healing when damage is done and an easier journey toward more resilience, right? So we get to these trees that help us understand the community piece and how these are all just kind of the product, right? They're what grows above the surface. They're the top of the iceberg. What we really want to understand, too, is how these community environments are really at the root of adverse childhood experience, how poverty really influences outcome. And I don't think that really has historically been a conversation that's connected a lot. It is now, but in history it hasn't. How discrimination, how racism, lack of opportunity. I was talking about the housing crisis. If you rent here in Nashville as a graduate student, honest to goodness, I don't know how you do it. I couldn't afford to rent these days. It's cheaper for me to own my home than it would be for me to go rent it because I bought my home so long ago, right? So that's key, is understanding how this affects everyone. If it's cheaper for a caregiver to stay at home with their kids than it is for them to find transportation, drive to a job, and pay for childcare, then we don't need to give them a hard time about staying home with their kids and not being a productive member of society, right? We just need to understand how all these things interlace together, because I think there was another tree. Just kidding. So we have a longer slide deck, and that's why I'm like, ooh, where's that slide? Where's that slide? But anyway, the key is we take these and we understand it, and we start to move our systems toward more productive addressing of poverty. Poverty, I sound like the Picanol girl. Poverty, and then improved housing. How do we improve our housing assistance and our public housing system that we have? How do we do that? That's the key, is looking at it from a whole and changing the roots that we're coming from, because then we change the output on the tree, right? So people always say, okay, great, that's good to know, but now what do I do, right? I love that y'all are having trauma-informed work. Man, I could preach about that all day too, because that's where you start to do your part. My work, I always say, do what you can where you are. I'm not the director of my agency. Carrie's not the commissioner of her department, but we get to do what we can where we are. And so we try to make things as good as we can, and these are just a few things that could help, like having access to high-quality, affordable childcare and pre-K. That seems like a really great thing, right? It is not the easiest thing to access out there. Having access to home visiting programs, which is probably new words for you guys, but home visiting programs help support families and mothers who are pregnant or new mothers. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you know. The fiscal note on that is a little tricky. And I think it's high quality pre-K, which means like evidence-based. And so I think what holds that bill up is the fiscal note, which is how much it would cost us as a state to implement, is that it's going to cost a lot of money. And so what we have to do when we think about talking to policymakers, and this is good for all of you, if you ever go talk to your policymaker, is connect it to what they're passionate about. How does early pre-K, how does evidence-based pre-K, early Head Start, things like, how does it support the outcomes they want? Yeah. Bonus points. Yes, stuff like that. Exactly right. Exactly right. I don't know if this session, they've been real focused on education this year. Do y'all talk about that? Oh man, that's some quality conversation right there. They have been really focused on education and revisiting what's called the Basic Education Program, BEP. I don't remember that last word. Anyway, about how we fund education. Interesting. We can talk about that offline when it's not being recorded. But it's so fascinating to hear. So let me finish this and I'm going to come back because I have a little soapbox I'm going to get on for 2 seconds. But anyway, you're exactly right. That's one example of how we help support this work. Home visiting is another. Like, we have been advocates at TCCY of expanding home visiting because those programs support expecting and new mothers. That sounds wonderful. If you've had children, you probably know there's not a lot of sleep involved for about a year, maybe longer. And so to have someone there just to say, let me support you in this work, that's phenomenal, but it's limited in our state. And just recently, we've gotten more money to expand that, which is super exciting. So things like that we're trying to do to help move these things forward. None of this is going to surprise any of you. But in Tennessee, this has kind of been our approach. We started with the green circle. We got to fix and adjust and improve constantly our philosophy and approach. How are we going to do this work? How are we going to address early adversity? How are we going to support better childhood development? Because when we do that, we're going to see policies change. We're going to see laws change. And then that's going to send money to new places. One slide that you didn't see in this deck is very roughly, I'm going to give you the Melissa interpretation, and I'm going to do it this way. So our brain's ability to change is way up here, right? When we are born, and then it drops pretty drastically by the time we're 4 or 5. We get the little bump over there in adolescence, but it's not quite the same. The money that we spend to address the changes in our brain at birth starts, so remember, we're up here for our change factor, more bang for your buck. We're down here for the money that we spend on early childhood development and programs like that. So our money that we spend goes way up as we get into adolescence. What do you think that money is spent on? It's not a trick question. Mental health programs and substance use programs. So our goal is to help shift, I don't know if shift is the right word, but help provide more funding down here in the early stages where we get more bang for our buck so that there's less needed in the older stages, right? How cool would that be? Yeah, if I can get $8 back for every $1 I spend, yeah, sign me up, I'm in. So if you have relatives who have foundations, I can hook you up. So we're going to shift our policies and our fundings. That's going to affect our programs because we're going to have more funding to do more programs to address these things earlier in life. And then that's going to affect how all of us sit in front of kids and families, right? So and this is why I came to work for the state, because I worked with kids and families forever. And I came to the state in 2013, I guess. And I remember saying, this is either going to go really well or really poorly really quickly. It's going well so far, thankfully. And I've landed in a great place for me to be able to do what I love. I don't work directly with kids and families anymore, but I came because I wanted to help address the system. Because when I was out there doing mental health services, the system was frustrating to me. And all love, but I haven't fixed it yet. But at least I'm doing part to help make it better, I hope. Carrie May can give you the inside scoop when I'm not here next week. But I'm trying to do my part. So this outside version is all of us, hopefully. Hopefully you see yourself somewhere in one of those. So we're just really looking to shift our conversation from what is wrong with you when we work with kids and families, because that's kind of us sitting on our pedestal and looking down, to what's happened, man. I'm just asking to join you in the conversation. Somehow we've come together. So as a public health clinical therapist, a lot of times, kids didn't ask to come and see me. They got told they had to come and see me, right? And they're like, and they're coming into school. High school starts way too early in Tennessee. I think there's a bill about that too. But, my kids would come to school, get off the bus at 6:50, man, and they were just honestly there to get 2 meals. And I would be, good morning, sunshine, love you. And this is the recording part, my apologies. They would be like, F you, Miss Melissa, I'm tired of you, shut the F up. And I'm like, oh, it's good to see you too, but that's who they are, right? And that's what we do, is we're here to support them. And I miss that work. But when I look at what I get to do now, I just have a different level of satisfaction from the work that I do. So I'm really just shifting from being like, okay, we need to fix what is wrong, instead to, man, tell me what's going on. I just get to join you in your journey right here, talk to me. And then if they don't talk, then we just color a lot of mandalas or what mandalas? Mandalas? I was like, what is that word? We just do a lot of coloring together for a while until we get to a place of conversation. But that'll take you a long way as you think about who you're working with and what you're doing. This is our webpage. It's such a pretty page. I will tell you that the government web pages are not my most exciting, but there's a lot of information there if you're interested. If you would like to send an evaluation and tell them that you think I was awesome or I talked too much or whatever, you're welcome to scan that bit.ly. But a lot of what TCCY does is advocacy. And so when we were talking about the education and pre-K and things like that, that is why it's so important to us to educate. Because all the education and the wisdom that, look, I'm going to stand in front of it so you can't. But all the education and things that we do is really about finding what's best for our kids and families. We support and endorse only really evidence-based or promising practices so that we can move towards more promising outcomes for our kids and families. Because probably know a lot of that data out there around the kids that we work with. We work with in public health some of the hardest cases, and our public health, mental health workers for sure, get paid not enough to do the work that they do. And you guys will do, or are doing now. So I think I did good. It's like, Carrie, I got done early. What? Y'all, that's unheard of. Questions? I didn't really ask. Thoughts, comments, other questions? We have a ton of resources at TCCY. You are welcome to email me anytime. Ellie can send you my email. Feel free. If you fall off of my screen, there's a decent chance I'll forget to email you back. So email me again and say, hey, lady, I emailed you. I'm more than happy. I love doing stuff like this. But thank you for letting us come. I won't be here next week. It's my birthday. So I made Carrie swap weeks with me because I love y'all, but I don't really want to be here at 5 o'clock on a Friday of my birthday. So y'all have fun. Carrie's awesome. That's all I got.
We have a little token of appreciation for coming to speak to us. We purposely wanted to support the community that's close to all of our hearts, so it's all from disabled artists. One of them's from Friends Life, which some of our severe program people are placed at, and then Biddies and Bows, which is it's national, but a coffee shop, and it's opening soon in Nashville. And then, yeah, we have some cool spices. That part isn't a disabled artist, but we try to do what we could. But thank you so much. Please, yeah, let's give her another round of applause. That was
Really, it's okay.
Please fill out the survey. It's on your tables and on the thing. And please actually fill it out. We see the numbers of who comes versus who fills them out. Oh, yeah. This one's for Vaba.
Sorry, we're going to make you fill out a lot of bit.lys.
But we also need data from what you thought for the grant, so please actually fill it out. But besides that, have a great weekend.